Yes, welcome back everybody, and thanks once again for retuning to your favourite and number one classic dirt bike TV channel, where of course we continue to look at more of those old school vintage race bikes from back in the day. Now we do have some very nice bikes lined up here on Classic Dirt Bike TV coming up in the next few weeks and months, and of course very soon we will be making our annual visit to the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and you can see some of the fancy bikes that were at that show over the course of the 2 days posted here on my channel soon after. So if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then now would be a good time, just in case you miss out on the future videos here on my channel. Okay, coming up next, we're going to go back to the Rob Hughes Classic Dirt Bike collection, and in this next video we're going to take a look at this super rare machine, and this is a 1996 350 CCM Enduro. So without any further delay, let's just jump straight into the video. Okay, so this next featured bike is another motocross gem that's been taken from the fantastic Rob Hughes CCM dirt bike collection, and this machine here is a 1996 C25 350 Enduro version, which as you know is super rare, as only 20 of these particular models were ever produced by CCM in that year. Now, it's also said that these bikes were manufactured specifically for the American market, although naturally our example here was one of the 20 bikes that never actually made it to the USA. Now again, as you'd expect, because there were so few of these models actually made, it's virtually impossible to now find one in these modern times. And in 1996, if you were living in America and bought one of these CCM bikes, one of these machines would have cost you around $7,215 at that time, which when you consider that you could buy a good XR 400 Honda for about $5,000, or even a WXC Husqvarna Enduro for $5,879. So even if you could get your hands on one of these 350 Enduros in that year, they were still quite expensive compared to similar bikes in its category. But beginning with the bike's frame, now this was a very strong tubular steel chassis that had the motor's engine oil housed inside the frame, and it also had a bolt-on detachable steel subframe at the rear that the likes of the seat and the plastic airbox were then bolted onto. Now as we move on to the bike's power plant, which again is powered by that well-proven Austrian-made Rotax 4-stroke engine, although of course this particular motor here isn't the big standard 600cc motor that were fitted to some of the other CCMs of the past, as this particular engine here is a 350cc unit, which naturally has a much smaller barrel and a different crankshaft to its larger brother. Although essentially this was still a Rotax 4-stroke 4-valve overhead cam motor with the standard cam timing belt that ran down this left side of the engine, and this toothed belt would of course keep all of the crank and valve gear in sync, rather than using a noisy oil bath timing chain that would of course add extra weight to what was already quite a heavy lump at about 90 pounds. Now, although the majority of these 96 350 CCMs were very well made, and it certainly had a set of good suspension at the front and at the rear, but this 350cc Rotax motor was very much underpowered, and it came in for some major criticism when it was tested by Dirt Bike magazine in the USA in 1996. And like I said, although the dirt bike testers praised much of the rest of the machine for its handling and general build quality, they weren't so forthcoming with any praise on this Rotax 350cc motor. And in fact, to use their own words, they said that the motor was so impressively slow that when you revved it, it made you think that it would never even reach its top end, which was a far cry from its bigger 600cc brother that had power and torque in absolute bucket loads. Now, it's also mentioned that back in 1996, part of the problem with this 350cc power plant was that they say it came in stock form with a big 39mm Delorto carburetor, which it said was far too big for such a small 350 motor, and by replacing it with a 36mm carburetor, it certainly did improve the overall power and performance of the engine. Now, once again, because this was an enduro bike, it was fitted with an electric start, which naturally was fantastic if you happened to stall the motor and needed a quick fire up and get away, although of course you then had to add the weight of the starter motor and its associated battery to the all-up weight of the bike, which then made the machine weigh in at around 285 pounds, which was quite heavy for a 350, but then again you could opt for the slightly lighter and cheaper option and go for the conventional kickstart model, although as only 10 were actually made of each version of this bike, you're very unlikely to actually come across one of these rare machines in this modern day. Now, once more, one of the plus points of these 350 Enduro CCMs was that they certainly did have decent suspension at the front, and that was supplied by these 45mm conventional Italian-made Marzocchi forks. And these Marzocchi Magnums were certainly state-of-the-art in the 1990s, and they were a very popular fitment to many other off-road motorbikes of that period. And again, these could be adjusted and tuned for rebound and damping to suit the rider's personal riding style and track conditions. Now, stopping power for these 96 350 CCMs were again supplied by these Italian-made Brembo hydraulic brakes, and on the front here we had a twin-cylinder piston caliper that provided excellent stopping power to slow the bike down. Although with the reputation that Rotax engine had for producing power and speed, then stopping this particular CCM wasn't really an issue. And of course, this hydraulic front brake caliper was much more efficient than the older drum systems that were fitted to the earlier CCMs. Now, as we move to the rear of the bike, now a slightly less powerful single-cylinder brake caliper that again did an excellent job, as these Brembo stoppers were said to be among the best in the business when they were mounted onto these CCMs. And so as we move to the bike's rear suspension, now fitted as a stock item to the back of these 96 CCMs was a single monoshock white power unit that was fitted in the fashion of what they called the laid down variety due to its very shallow angle in comparison to the bike's rear swing arm. But the white power shock was just bolted directly onto the bike chassis at the top and then onto the swing arm at the bottom, with none of the type of linkage arms that you would normally find on other 1990s off-roaders. Now, once again, at the back of the bike, a pretty straightforward alloy box section type swing arm, which, as I remember, was quite long for a 350cc machine, which they say was to compensate for the laid down shallow angle of that white power rear shock. Now, also bolted on to this left side of the swing arm was a side stand, just in case you needed to park the bike during an enduro event. But again, this swing arm was very light and very strong, and it also had minimal flex at the rear end. Although overall the front and rear suspension on these 1996 CCMs were excellent, despite the shortcomings of lack of power from that 350cc Rotax motor. But of course, as you know, these Rotax motors were a single cylinder four-stroker, but they did have this twin port cylinder head configuration that had these two header pipes that then ran into a single midsection that then led to a big tailpipe at the rear. Now, this particular exhaust system here was made of stainless steel, and despite their smaller looking diameter, it still had a decent bark out of this custom made tail cone, even although this was still a quite smaller 350cc engine. Now, as with many of the other off-road bikes of the 1990s, these CCMs also had a plastic fuel tank, and this fuel cell here normally held just over 2.2 gallons of gas, which was usually more than enough to complete a few enduro sections before requiring a top-up. But the tanks were all custom made to fit around this steel CCM chassis, and these C25 graphics were of course to celebrate 25 years of the great CCM empire. And as we move to the bike's seat now, this again was one of the highboy type affairs where it was then fixed over the bottom of the fuel tank, allowing the rider to shift his weight over the front of the bike just to try and help it make sharper turns. And so as we take a look at the bike's controls, now these again are your Brembo master cylinder for the front brakes, and the gas or throttle assembly is made by Domina, as is of course the handlebar grips. Now, the switchgear for the engine starter and the bike's lights are all made by Leonelli in Spain. And again, we have that all-important decompressor lever just to help you get that 350 motor fired into life. Although I have to say that these 1996 350 CCMs were still a very well built motorcycle, because they did have a good strong steel frame. They had good suspension on the front and the back, and of course excellent brakes in those Brembo stoppers, although they were let down by of course that vastly underpowered 350 four-stroke Rotax engine. Although having said that, imagine if you could shoehorn that bigger and better 604 Rotax engine into this chassis, which I'm sure would then turn this particular machine into a completely different animal altogether. But I suppose at the end of the day, the bike was built for enduro racing, so I suppose that overall speed was really secondary to the bike's reliability and functionality for the racetrack. Although for me personally, the very fact that we're even able to take a look at what is basically a factory fresh example of one of these CCMs from 1996 is just amazing, that when you consider how very few of these bikes were actually made, and when the bikes were shipped to the USA, these 350s were up against some very good competition from the likes of the XR400 Honda and WXC Huskies of that year, although the $7,000+ price tag also didn't help it sell, even although there were very few in the country. But once again, another super rare example of Alan Cluse's motorcycle building expertise. And again, it's thanks to Rob Hughes for allowing us to take a look at another of the great motorcycles that he has tucked away in his Aladdin's cave of very precious CCMs. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that walk around Rob Hughes' fantastic and very rare 1996 350 C25 CCM, a lovely machine, and extremely rare, of course, because all of these bikes were destined to only be sold in the USA. So we're going to head now to the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, which is only a week away. So when we return to CDB TV, we will be showcasing some of the very nice machines that I captured over the course of the 2 days at the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. And of course, if you can't make the show this year, then you can still see some of the lovely specimens here on my channel soon after by simply subscribing to my channel. But until then, everybody out there, continue to be safe and well, and watch what you're doing when you're riding those old vintage dirt bikes. And I will see you again very soon when we all return to look at more vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.